Section 2, Our Reality. Today's mainline churches, including us, have done a lot to rid ourselves of this horrific racism within its membership and within the institutions of the church. We are trying our best. We have been doing our best to overcome this past filled with racism, hatred, and bigotry when we make disciples. As a start, in Christ, we have confessed and are confessing our wrongs. We have repented for what we have done against the indigenous neighbors, the gender minorities, and others. We are able to examine and learn how our church, the Presbyterian Church in Canada, participated in the society-wide oppression of the black neighbors so that the new disciples will not be made in our images of the painful past. Yet, in spite of our past and present history, we must take Jesus' command to go to the world seriously. As we have seen so far, if we go to the world and try to make disciples from the position of power and privilege, we can easily fall into the trap of racism just like our ancestors. Thus, we need to ask and ponder deeply about how Jesus made his disciples. How do we make others Jesus' disciples today? Immediately, we think of teaching them with what we know about faith. For some of us, teaching means telling them about Jesus, what he taught, and our theological understanding of Jesus. That means we are telling them who, what, and how to believe. As they learn, they can be baptized and made to be Christians. At least this is the kind of thing we think about. In some church circles, this education is very structured and systematized. People are invited to come to their churches. Once these strangers enter into their churches by attending worship, they are encouraged to join classes to become Christians. There are various courses that will indoctrinate these new candidates through baptism courses, membership courses, or whatever introductory curriculums they have developed. Many of today's teaching methods are very much based on our current education system. That is, much of what we teach and learn are centered on passing on of facts and knowledge. It is set up like a teaching grade 1 students with alphabets and reading skills. When you move up to grade 2, you get to read and write longer sentences. Everything is head or brain learning. In this way, we try to make disciples by filling people's brains first. Section 3. Learning from Jesus. I have been wondering about how to make disciples for the last 30 years. If we are to figure out the way God created human beings, according to Genesis, God did not make human beings out of spirit first. God formed the body out of dust, then breathed in the spirit. When God called Moses, there was no regiment of learning. There was no training. He was not filled with special knowledge immediately. Each time he had to say something to Pharaoh, he was given what to say. Even as he was leading the people of Israel in the desert, much of what he told the people came from God. God called him and told him what to say. This is the pattern of how God made prophets. Jesus did the similar thing in a way. Jesus did not demand the disciples to know everything first. First, he called them. Then he lived and traveled with them. He did not teach them right away. They were his disciples not because they knew everything about Jesus, but because they were following him. And as they went, they learned what he taught. Were they good at learning? Not according to the Gospels. Both Mark and John describe how disciples failed, just like everyone else, in knowing what Jesus was saying and doing. The disciples came to know who Jesus truly was only after the resurrection and especially after the Pentecost. In this context, hearing Jesus say, "Make disciples," does not conjure up the image where students are gathered in order to learn from a teacher to be disciples. This is the first thing for us to know. Everyone becomes a disciple when she or he answers the call from Jesus and begins to follow him. There is no requirement to be baptized or to have acquired so much knowledge. There is only unconditional love being offered to all who are willing to hear the call and follow. Perhaps the worst mistake we make as Christians is that we have accepted the traditional notion that baptism makes everyone a disciple. This is putting what Jesus said backward. In this passage, Jesus puts making disciples part before baptizing. Calling and following precedes baptism. Baptism comes after someone begins to follow. It is important to see in the Gospels that the 12 were called first. Baptisms were not required of all those who followed him. We're not told how many of the 12 went to John the Baptist at Jordan to be baptized, and if Jesus baptized any. We do not even have any record of Jesus baptizing anyone. Only at Pentecost the baptism by the Spirit came to them all.